5 is find something interesting. So this again this seems really abstract, but this is by looking at the raw data and being concrete about it, you will eventually find something interesting in the data or the domain you're dealing with. At first, it could be pretty trivial and pretty obvious, right? So especially if you're doing more data-driven work. The first few analyses you come with are like, yeah, that makes sense, but it's kind of obvious. It's not super interesting. But you'll eventually start finding something that's more and more interesting. And the cool thing is that the more hours you put into it, assuming you're in a decent direction, the better intuition you're building about this topic. And the more likely you're able to find something interesting and someone else isn't. And one of the benefits of having this time to do a PhD is that you actually have the time to find something interesting, right? That if you're if you're thinking about, if you're in a domain and someone is like over a weekend or over their spare time, like, oh yeah, I want to do, I'm trying to think of a good example, like, we'll say like the mining Twitter data thing, right? So what Henry and folks are doing is, you can imagine all these people on their weekends, like, oh, we're going to use the Twitter API, let's mine it, let's run some NLP stuff on it, let's just try to find some insights. And they're probably not going to get super far, and they're probably not going to get some really interesting insights because they're just doing it as a hobby in their spare time, and they don't really have any domain expertise. But if that's your project and you're cranking on it, and you're looking at the raw data, you're looking at people's tweets, seeing what they're doing, seeing how that correlates, trying some simple machine learning things, and then building up better models, you're going to be able to find more interesting stuff than the weekend people. And I feel like that's one of the biggest values of doing your PhD is that you can become a domain expert in something, whereas there are plenty of people who are just kind of, kind of hobbyists who are doing this on the side, and they're not going to be able to do as interesting things as you because they're just not putting. It's not that they can't. It's just that that's not their job, right? Their main job is to be working at place X doing something, and then on their spare time, like, oh, I'm going to analyze some Twitter data just for fun to make a blog post. But if this is your full-time job, you're going to be able to find something way more interesting than they will. The next one is push hard on clean signals. So what does that mean? This means that as you're working toward, again, this is a very data-oriented take on things, but it could generalize, is you're going to be going in all sorts of directions, and there's some signals that seem pretty fuzzy and ambiguous, and there's other ones that seem cleaner. So this is kind of the point before, is that, yeah, maybe the fuzzy and more ambiguous signals could mean something better in the future, but at the moment, because we want to keep moving, the cleanest signals are probably what to follow up with first. And this goes to the simplicity thing, right? That chances are, if something is so convoluted that you have to, bend your head around it way too much, it may be something to do in the future. But for now, kind of as a first-year student, right, that you just really have to find that path with fairly clean signals. I'm trying to figure out a good example for this. And in the machine learning or AI cases, the simpler the model you can fit to have your thing work, probably the better you can make progress and iterate. Let me keep moving on number 7. We're halfway through. Actionable. So let's stick in it. So actionable means, when you're working, this, you want to try to do stuff so that when you go to the meetings with your advisor, like with that thing, that there's actually some action that can come out of it, and so which means, one way to interpret this actionable thing is you have something you worked with, you have a thing, and one of the ideal meetings, I think, is you're working and you're working, and then so imagine you're here somewhere, and you're working and you're working, and then you slow down, and then you're like completely stuck, right? You work to the point where you're slowing down, you're completely stuck, but you're stuck with a bunch of choices. You're stuck with, should I do A, B, C, D, or E? And then you have a meeting with your advisor, you have an artifact, you have a thing you're meeting about, and then you have, that thing implies several possible actions, A, B, C, or D, or E. And that could be a super productive meeting, because you go in the meeting, you say, I've worked this much, I'm completely stuck, I don't know where it would go, but I have a thing that I produce out of it, some kind of object, and there are several possible obvious directions, or maybe not so obvious to go in. Let's think about what to do, and let's weigh these options. And I feel like that gives you probably the best feedback, because then what you have is you have your advisors you're kind of picking their brain on their intuitions about, they've seen this sort of things in the past somehow, in a different form, maybe on a different project, and they're like, okay, these 2 paths are definitely bad. Like, this is probably not going to go anywhere. These 3 may be okay. So then which way do we do? So let's put these 3 down. These 2 are obviously bad. Let's put these 3 down. And this seems like the cleanest signal, right? This seems like the strongest so far. Let's go here. We don't know if it's right, right? Because we knew it's right, we just go right away. We don't know if it's right. Let's go here, but let's shelve these other 2 for next week or the week after. And then you just repeat. So if you get to the point, it's okay to be stuck, but if you get to the point where you're stuck, the most important thing is to have one to kind of meet with your advisor, talk to people, but then to have some action you can perhaps take afterward. Let's go to number 8, which is, do I have the right number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 8 is comparative advantage is key. So what comparative advantage means is, it's this economic term, but loosely speaking, it means, what can you do that you can do better than other people, and what advantages do you have and do you bring to the table, and you build this up as you go on, right? As in the beginning, you have some base set of skills and experiences and interests, but as you go on, you build up more and more of a comparative advantage on one thing, and the PhD really is a specialty sort of path, right, and not as much of a generalist path. And it's because you're building up expertise and comparative advantage in one domain, and you hope that that's a domain you're interested in, that's relevant, right? That's more generally relevant to other things. But this is really key. So thinking about, if you have a project direction, what things you have specific insights into that perhaps other people don't. Because if you don't, then you're competing against everybody else who knows how to code and knows how to, make graphs and stuff. And if you're competing against thousands or tens of thousands of other people, yeah, it's fine. You can slog ahead, but it makes life a lot easier if you have a comparative advantage in something.